Some prices ain't counted in coin. They're tallied in the soul. The wind carried dust and regret through the open door of the old grain warehouse, and the day's first sunlight lay in hard, white slashes across the floorboards like the marks of a switch. Copper Falls bustled outside, mules balking, tin cups clacking, hawkers calling their wares. But inside the auction ring the noise thinned to a wire. You could pluck it and hear the whole town tremble. Silas Ward had $3 in his pocket and a coil of old rope tied to his saddle. He'd ridden in for rope and coffee, nothing more. He told himself that twice, then a third time for the road dust sitting bitter on his tongue. The years had browned him to rawhide and pared his talk to the bone. He was the kind of man folks mistook for a fence post until he moved, the kind of man who wore his grief like a hat, plain, practical, and near invisible unless you knew what to look for. He knew better than to go near a crowd. Crowds made men braver and meaner than they were alone. Still, the once-a-week ruckus by the warehouse pulled him like a bad tooth pulls a tongue. He drifted to the doorway, boots whispering over splinters, and slipped into the cool dimness. That's where he heard the voice, a greasy ribbon of sound slicked over with cheer. Lot 17, young, teachable, can read and scratch figures. Who'll start me at 50? Silas saw her the way a man sees a fawn on thin ice, too light to break it herself, too doomed to stay standing. A Chinese girl, hardly grown, black hair matted into hurried braids, a blue cotton jacket rubbed pale at the elbows. She stood on a crate, as if the wood itself were ashamed to hold her. The auctioneer held a paper like a churchman brandishing scripture. The crowd stared like parishioners nodding along to a comfortable sin. 50, someone sang, lazy as a cat. 60, another, bowler hat, sweat stripes, eyes like nickels. Murmurs thickened, half mirth and half sugar, the kind that coats a man's teeth until his smile looks too white. Silas shifted, and the girl's eyes flicked to him, dark as wet walnut, bright as pain-catching light. Her fear wasn't loud. It was clean. It set itself next to his ribs and asked nothing. 70, called a foreman for the Eastern Pit, the one they said docked a man's pay for coughing. 80, breathed the saloon's bookman, palming his vest like he'd misplaced his heart there. Silas's hand found the brass of his belt buckle. He felt the $3 behind it, as if coin could warm. The auctioneer raised his gavel, and the room tensed like a horse at a whip crack. A voice, his own, stepped out of him and walked across the floor. 350. The gavel hesitated midair. Heads turned like a field of sunflowers snapping to a cloud break. Silas didn't look away from the girl, and the girl didn't look away from him. Somewhere behind him a glass chuckled against a tooth. The auctioneer smiled like a grease lamp catching. $3.50. Do I hear 4? Silas's pulse stuttered. He had 3 even, a crooked dime's memory, and 2 dead cents shy. But the words were in the air now, and words in the air have a way of finding gravity. Going once, going twice, sold. The crack of wood on would split the morning. Laughter rose and snapped shut like a pocket knife. Silas's body remembered to breathe. His mind did not. The auctioneer sidled over, palms out, gavel tapping his fingers like a mosquito that had learned music. 350, friend, and make it neat. Silas reached into the weary pocket where his whole arithmetic lived. 3 paper bones came out, soft and wilted with work, not the kind of money that ever sat long in a church plate. He counted them once, then again like maybe they'd have bread in the darkness. They hadn't. A hand the size of a frying pan slid 2 silver quarters into his palm. "You're short," said Marshal Amos Tucker, close enough to smell the cedar oil in his scabbard. His voice had a way of standing a man up straight, without touching him. Tucker wore law the way Silas wore grief, like something he hadn't asked for but couldn't set down. Pay the man. Silas put the patched dollars and the borrowed mercy into the waiting hand. The auctioneer licked a finger, counted twice, and sniffed. "Papers?" he asked, triumphant as a rooster. He lifted the bill of sale, so the wet ink glistened like a wound. Silas looked at the paper, then at the girl, then at the paper again, as if it might sprout a pulse if he stared long enough. He took it without reading. Some words you know in your bones. Seeing them wouldn't change the price. The crowd lost interest with the speed of flies when the meat's gone. Men drifted toward the next pen where bawling calves promised honest cruelty. Dust rose. Someone joked about fence posts buying kindling. A few stayed, though, the sort with eyes that liked to count and hands that liked to help. Silas stepped toward the crate like a man nearing a skittish colt. He stopped where shadow met light, so his size wouldn't fall over her like a wall. "My name's Silas," he said, the syllables rasped down to rope and weather. "Ain't here to harm you." Her gaze tested him, measuring for splinters. The words came as soft as moth wings. "Men, a name like a seed, small and stubborn." He nodded once, the way men nod to storms when they have to go out anyway. "You hungry?" She didn't answer, just glanced at his hand. Not the palm, empty, but the angle of it, the way it hung open without clawing. After a second, she dipped her chin. They stepped into sunlight that felt like a question. The morning had warmed past comfort. Copper Falls was a chorus of cheap tin and leather strap, and the street had begun its long, dry creak toward noon. Men watched them pass with faces that practiced being blank and failed. Women watched with faces that didn't try. At Garrett's eating house, the bell over the door jangled like a nerve. Garrett himself oozed into the frame, forearms bakery white where the sun never touched. His apron was clean, his heart was not. "We don't serve her kind," he said, considering the dust on Silas's hat like it had brought shame to his threshold. Silas kept his voice level. "You serve coin." Garrett's smile showed molars like river stones. "Out back with the wash tubs, there's where her kind eats." The air cooled around Silas. A far-off hammer stopped banging. He had tried all his life to be a man who didn't break things. He succeeded most days. This did not feel like most days. A shadow fell over the threshold. "House rules will get you into heaven only if the Lord happens to agree with the landlord," said Tucker, not raising his tone. "Word is he's picky." Garrett's blubbering confidence hiccuped. He stepped sideways in that way men do when they think they're bowing but they're checking for guns. "No offense meant, Marshal. Just keeping order." "That's so." Tucker's eyes moved from Silas to men and back, weighing costs like a shopkeeper but showing no sums. "There's order that keeps and order that kills. Which are you selling today, Garrett?" Silas angled his body to shield men from the doorway. He could feel the crowd thickening in the street, the way flies thicken when meat warms. He wasn't a talker. He was a doer who knew how to keep his doing small. But the girl's silence perched on his shoulder like a bird he didn't dare shrug off. "We'll eat someplace else," he said low. "Mrs. Henderson's boarding house," Tucker offered, as if pointing out shade. "Kitchen's open to any man with manners. Or woman." Then he stepped aside and let them pass, his presence a plank laid across bad water. They took the back ways. Copper Falls had 1,000 of them. Seams between buildings where the wind forgot to blow, alleys where cats practiced assassination, the narrow lanes of a town that grew like a weed around a stone. Men walked close enough that the hem of her jacket brushed Silas's sleeve. He didn't look down. Some small proverbs you don't break by noticing. Mrs. Henderson opened the door with hands that had poured coffee for 30 years and wiped tears for 50. She took one look at men and fetched stew without a word, beef, carrots, a heel of bread shiny with butter. The bowl steamed. The steam made Silas think of winter mornings, of a house whose stove had cooled forever, of a little grave under cottonwood. He looked away. Men ate slow as a prayer until the room quieted around the sound of her spoon. She did not slop or rush. Still, the bowl emptied with a hunger that seemed older than she was. Silas sipped coffee that tasted like tin and mercy. He kept his hat brim low and his ears open. Copper Falls was talking. It did not like what it was saying. "What for you do this?" Men asked finally, head tilted the way you angle a lamp to find a crack. Her English came careful, each word held measuring in the palm before letting it go. "Why you bought?" Silas set his cup down and considered the window where sunlight fell in ladders across the far wall. "Truth is stubborn out here. It asks to be told plain or not at all. Seemed a sin to let the day get uglier while I had hands," he said. Her eyes didn't soften. but they steadied. "Other men buy," she whispered. "For use. I ain't other men." He wasn't sure if that was confession or hope. Maybe both. The door banged. 3 figures filled the room like a bad weather front. Cord Jennings landed first, rich, red loud. His boy Blake flanked him, mean quick, the kind of fast that breaks things it won't remember. Frank Morrison, the mine runner, rounded the set with a smile cut to fit a narrow hole. "Ward," Jennings barked, voice already at hang you somewhere volume. "You made this town look foolish." Silas rose without hurry, chair legs rasping like a snake in dry grass. "Not my best skill. Still, I manage." Blake's hand strayed, near his pistol the way a tongue finds a sore. "Send her out. We'll see she gets where she ought." "Where's that?" Silas asked. "Back on a block," Morrison said, gentle as a saw. "We're out of our county." Mrs. Henderson made a noise you hear when something breaks in a woman that had no business breaking. Tucker wasn't in the doorway. Silas felt the absence the way men feel weather in a knee. "Leave," he told them. Jennings laughed, a big-bellied thing with no room for humor. "You forget yourself, Ward. We run her, and you, out, and we do it singing." The room went still enough to hear the clock stutter on the mantel. Silence in the West isn't empty. It's a bag men's stuff with decisions. Bootsteps. Then that cedar oil law again. Tucker slid into the parlor like a door shutting softly. "You boys gone and mistook my town for a trough," he said. "It ain't. Law's on our side," Blake snapped. "Ain't legal buying folks." "Then it ain't legal selling," Tucker replied, mild as rain. "And I got a wire from the circuit judge, says he's curious about where exactly men got the notion they could write bills of sale on people in a free territory." The 3 stiffened, their confidence flinched. Tucker had a way of turning a man's certainty into a chair with one leg. "You can argue philosophy with the judge," he went on, "or you can finish your dinners elsewhere." Blake's lip curled. "This ain't over. It is for supper time," Tucker said. "Rest will loosen later." They withdrew with the clumsy grace of men and used to backing up. The door shut. Someone outside cussed the sun. Tucker set his hat on the chair back and looked past Silas to men. "You safe here another minute," he told her, "maybe 10. After that, the town's going to remember the way to ugly again. You got somewhere to be, Silas?" "Ranch," Silas said. 10 miles rough. Take the Henderson's back wagon." Tucker said to the air like he and the room had been finishing one another's sentences for years. "I'll trouble certain men on the main road. Give you a little quiet." Mrs. Henderson fetched keys without asking what law says about lending salvation. Men rose, her bowl empty and her hands empty and her future empty until someone set something in it. They left by the kitchen, through steam and the smell of lye, out to the alley where shadow stayed cool longer and the world remembered how to be kind. The wagon stood in a lean-to like a stubborn cousin. The horse, old, sorrel, hip-boned, flicked flies with a tail that could have written scripture in dust. As Silas helped men up, her fingers snagged his sleeve with the sudden clutch of a sparrow in wind. "What if they come to your home?" she asked. "We'll meet him at the gate," he said. "You will die," she said, not as prophecy, only as arithmetic. "Maybe," he allowed. Then he handed her the reins to hold while he set the harness straight. "But we ain't dead yet." They rattled out the alley and into a side street where the sun was already a weight on the neck. Silas cut sideways past a wheelwright and a shuttered tin shop, angling for the long scrub path that skirted the dry creek. He could feel the town waking fully behind them, feel it turning its head to watch. A yell cut the air. Hoofbeats clattered. Trouble took a breath. "Hold your seat," he told her, and the old mare shouldered into a trot that felt like a prayer said by a worn-out deacon. Unpretty, but heard. The first shot came lazy, a wasp that remembered to sting after it flew past. The second came hungry and split the wagon plank by Silas's knee, coughing splinters into the light. He jerked the mare left into the scrub where the ground pitched up. The wagon bucked like a cold colt. Men went white around the mouth, but didn't cry out. Behind them, Blake hooped the way boys who've never seen an inn think a hunt should sound. Rocks rose like knuckles. Ahead, The trail ducked between two shoulders of granite where wagon wheels had worn a narrow throat. Silas pointed the mare at it and felt the world narrow with him. The wagon scraped through, singing a wooden song. He hauled the brake and swung down, rifle already in his hands, the way a man who's lived close to loneliness keeps certain things close to reach. Down, he told Min, and she slid to the floorboards, eyes steady as a leveled coin. Blake appeared at the pinch point with a grin borrowed from a skull. "Send her out," he called. "We'll let you walk." "Go to hell," Silas said, and his voice didn't raise to meet the rocks. The gunplay came grin first. Chips of granite leapt and sang. Silas answered careful and mean. Blake's horse shied and nearly threw him. One of the others hauled back, eyes gone all white. For a breath the world balanced on gun smoke and sun. And then, like weather, Silas felt ahead what the air hadn't said yet. Hoofbeats coming from the far side, too. Trapped. He looked down. Min watched him like a pupil watches a teacher, scratching chalk. He felt for the paper in his coat. The bill the auctioneer had held up like scripture. It crinkled like a lie. Silas tore it, clean, unhurried rips, and let the wind shoulder their shamed white flags into the sage. "What you do?" she whispered. "Setting you free," he said, and found that the words made room inside him where something had been crowding for years. Hoofbeats swelled. Men shouted. The mare blew hard and set her feet. Then a different voice shouldered its way through the noise, steady as a courthouse clock. "That's far enough, boys." Tucker and 3 deputies appeared on the high rock like judgment hanging its coat. The marshal's pistol didn't wave around. It decided. The men between the rocks looked at one another and discovered they'd rather be elsewhere. Blake's rage turned colorless. "This is a federal matter now," Tucker called down, conversational as gossip. "Any man who put a hand to this traffic will find his name written where ink don't fade." The world took a breath. Hooves turned. Trouble learned humility, at least for the noon hour. When the dust settled, Tucker swung down and came to the wagon slow. His eyes found the torn shreds of paper clinging to creosote and cactus spines. He nodded once, like a preacher who's heard the correct verse without needing the citation. "You two all right?" he asked. Silas's hands were shaking in that way they do when a body remembers it wants to live. "We will be." Tucker tugged his hat brim at Min. "Miss, you ain't chattel. Not in my county. Not anywhere a decent man stands upright." For the first time, something small moved in her face that wasn't caution. Not trust yet. A seed's coat cracking. Silas set his boot to the wagon step. The mare flicked an ear. The long road home unrolled in his mind. Harsh and empty the way truth looks before you put your feet on it. He gathered the reins and glanced at Min. "Now," he said, "we go home." The wagon creaked into the wide light, and the desert watched like it always does, without favor, without hurry, keeping all its books where men couldn't reach them. But as the wheels took the ruts and the mare found her old rhythm, Silas felt a change in the arithmetic. He had come to town for rope and coffee. He left with something that didn't fit in a saddlebag. Not a purchase, a promise. The road west of Copper Falls is a ribbon laid by a blind God. Straight where it should bend, rough where kindness might have been. The wagon groaned its complaints into the heat, and the mare plodded with a saint's patience, her ribs working like bellows. Sage gave up its bitter perfume beneath the wheels, and cicadas sawed at the silence until it rang like wire. Min rode, facing backward, watching the town dwindle into the mirage and then into memory, hands folded like a novice who'd mislaid her beads. She did not fidget. She did not ask how far. Sometimes she turned her face to the wind and shut her eyes like the air itself might wash something clean. "You hurt?" Silas asked at last, not because he hadn't been thinking it, but because men of his kind only risk the asking once they've rehearsed the listening. She touched the bruises painted on both forearms in thumb-bright bands. "Not new," she said. "Old hurts grow roots," he murmured, mostly to the road. A mile passed under them. Mesas rose slow as forgiveness, wearing evening light like shawls. The horizon stacked itself into blues and grays until the world looked like it had been folded by a careful mother. "You got folks?" he asked after time. Her gaze didn't leave the emptiness behind them. Across water, she said. Long time. Father gone. Mother, sold my. She searched the sage for a word. Contract. Say gold. Say good life. Her mouth tightened. The smallest storm. Not true. Silas nodded the way a man nods when the truth licks the same old scar. World's full of ink that lies. She glanced at him, then, with an interest that wasn't hope yet. Your wife? She tried, feeling the word like a stone she might throw across a creek. Gone, he said, and the syllable dragged a wagon load. Fever took my girl, took her ma after. House kept standing. I didn't. He cleared his throat. Ain't much of a talker, Min. But you got questions I reckon I can answer after a fashion. She considered this. Considered him. Talk later, she decided gently, as if saving money. They turned off the road where a cottonwood marked a shallow wash and followed a two-rut track that remembered wagon axles and thunderstorms in equal measure. A windmill grew from the earth like a stubborn idea, creaking on a feverless breeze. Then the house showed itself, low, unpainted, weathered to the color of patience. A porch dragged across the front like a tired grin, a line of staked tomatoes so green they looked like hope set upright. The mare stopped of her own mind. Animals know when they're allowed to rest. Silas climbed down, hips popping like old doors, and came round to offer Min his hand, palm up, fingers easy. She eyed the porch, the limp curtains, the way the place wore its loneliness without shame. Then she took his hand and stepped lightly to the ground, keeping herself small until the boards learned her weight. Water pump there, he said, nodding toward the handle under the windmill's weak shadow. Well's honest. Barn sound. House, leaks some by the north sill. I ain't much of a carpenter. He frowned. That sounded like a boast. It ain't. The corner of her mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile that had survived winters. I can fix leaks, she said. Hands learn. She fetched the pump handle through its arc, and the spout coughed up a ribbon of iron-cold relief that flashed silver in the afternoon. She drank the way hungry people eat when they still remember pride. Then she scrubbed her hands, quick and neat, as if scouring away possession. In the kitchen, dust where the stove like talc. A blue cup with a chip in its rim kept its place by the sink, as if waiting had been its employment. Silas set coffee to boil by habit, and then, remembering, turned sheepish. You likely had enough stew to float a man, he said. Ain't much here besides beans and pride. She opened the cupboard as if inventory were prayer. Flour, salt, 3 onions, the heel of bacon wrapped in brown paper like a poor man's gift. Enough, she said. Pan. He handed one over and stood back. People who have lost someone often stop at doorways, unwilling to enter the room where the missing sits invisible. He stayed in the threshold and watched men move the way careful women move. No wasted steps, no clatter that might wake a temper. She fried onions until the house smelled like a gentle Sunday. She scraped bacon into the skillet, so soft you'd think meat had feelings. Beans went in with a whisper and a pinch of salt, and the kettle chattered in agreement. A minute later, the old place remembered it was a home. They ate at the small table under the window where dusk pooled. Outside, a calf bawled toward its mother and got the world's most patient answer. The windmill creaked. The day exhaled. Thank you, Min said, spoon pausing politely in midair for the word's sake. For food. For not letting me. She gestured toward the horizon where town had been. She didn't finish the thought. It didn't need finishing. Silas studied the blue cup between his hands. I ain't a savior, he said. Just a man found himself on a morning he'd rather forget. She tilted her head. Savior is loud, she said. You are quiet. Then after a beat, quiet saves too. They finished in peace, which is a thing that can be eaten if you don't mind the taste of plain. On the porch, the sky fell open. Stars shook themselves clean. Coyotes tuned up in the far coulees, singing kilometer-long sadness with tooth and throat. Min sat with her back to the post, knees drawn, chin on them, watching darkness find its shape. Silas rocked without rocking in a chair that had outlived laughter. For a while they shared breath and the small sounds of a house remembering company. You ain't safe, he said at last, because honesty had a way of bristling if you kept it caged. Men like Jennings don't forget being told no. Boys like Blake build churches to it. Min nodded like a woman who'd read a great deal without letters. I know, she said. Danger is common. I can fence, he went on. I can shoot straight enough when the wind ain't praying against me. But there's law, and there's the space where law forgets its job. Tucker's a good man. He can't be everywhere. She let that settle. You think I should go? Hi. She didn't ask as a supplicant. She asked like someone assessing a canyon ford. Silas weighed her in the corner of his eye, her wiry strength, the way she sat ready to run or mend, depending on which thing the night asked first. I think you should stay until you know which way your feet truly want, he said. Then I'll see you to it. Her head turned. Moonlight made her eyes a metal he couldn't name. You give land to feet, she said. This is new. He tugged his hat brim lower against starlight. You'll find I ain't much for chains. Even the soft kind folks call favors. Silence again. This one companionable. The porch boards barely remember they're grown. Then Min said very softly, if they come, men from town, what you do? Stand, Silas said. The word didn't puff itself up. It just sat there, honest as a fence post. She tapped the slat with her nail, thinking. I stand to, you ain't obliged. Obliged? She searched her pockets of vocabulary. No. Choice. She smiled then, more than a ghost. A small lantern lit in a window. I have that now. Before dawn, before the rooster remembered his job, he woke to a sound old grief knows. The catch of breath in a room with the door shut. Choking off surprise, he left his bed quiet and crossed the hall. Min had the pallet he'd laid in the corner of the spare room that used to be his daughter's. The one he could not enter for years because it smelled like braids and the tiny cut leather shoes with their foolish flowers. He paused at the threshold the way men do when met by their past, wearing a nightdress. Min lay stiff, eyes open, staring up as if the ceiling carried omens. The moon had moved. Its light penciled the little shelf where a wooden horse still stood, one wheel gone, a child's careful repair tied in string around the axle. You sleep? He asked, already knowing the answer. Sleep is heavy, she said. I am not strong enough tonight. He considered the horse, the string mending. I had a girl, he said. Sarah. She liked that horse. I meant to fix it straight. He put his palm flat to the door jamb. Kept meaning. Then the Lord did his arithmetic. Min turned her face toward him. No pity there, only the straight weight of witness. You love them, she said. Enough to hurt now. Never figured pain for proof, he muttered. But here we are. A coyote yipped close, emboldened by fences that kept dogs in. The sound propped a question up between them. Why you live alone? She asked. He huffed. Company's a mirror that don't lie. Some days a man can't stand his own reflection. Min pushed herself up on an elbow. But mirror is also map. Shows where faces. Shows where food on chin. A tiny grin. You need mirror to not look foolish. He laughed. Rusty and short, like a sky that hadn't known rain. It surprised them both. Maybe I do. Morning swung its legs over the horizon. Chickens struck matches in the dust. The ranch woke into work because work is the prayer the land understands. Silas showed Min how to warm the pump head with heated water so the seal wouldn't split. Min showed Silas how to mend a torn feed sack so it would hold another season. He showed her where the fence sagged and how to catch a staple between thumb and forefinger without bleeding. She showed him how to pinch a tomato sucker so the plant remembered its purpose. They didn't talk much while the sun was up. They saved words like sugar for when they'd need sweetness later. Near noon, Tucker came riding in with a dust-tail and a face that had learned news. He swung from the saddle and took off his hat to the shade. Brought a sack of coffee and a string of rumors, he said. One'll keep you awake, and both will ruin your stomach. Silas poured water from the dipper. Min watched from the porch, her hands still on the wetness of the pump handle, as if something in her had not decided it could come that far into ease. Tucker sipped and grimaced. Jennings is digging in. He's telling any man who'll believe him that Ward's running a colored body out past the cottonwood. His eyes hardened. Part of my mouth, miss. Min's gazed in flinch. She'd stood in rooms where words were knives. This one was only a thorn. What's the judge say? Silas asked. Circuit's a week off if the weather don't pitch a fit. My telegram's on his desk with all the ugliness pinned to it. Until then, we play schoolmaster and ruler. I can whack knuckles. I can't cure willful. He set the cup down. Jennings'll come, Silas. Maybe with paper dressed up to look like law. Maybe with hands that think they are. Then he'll meet fence and facts, Silas said. Fact don't stop a mob, Tucker answered. Fences slow it, but they hate being taught. Men stepped off the porch. You say judge a week. She held up one finger, then drew a line in the air. We need 7 lines. Tucker's mouth twitched. Plans. She nodded, brisk as a foreman. Plan for day. Plan for night. For gate. For river. For fire. For, she searched. For lies. Silas looked between them. You two just hired me, he said. What's first? Neighbors, Tucker said. Not the angry ones. The quiet ones. There's Mrs. Bell down to Dry Fork. She's got sons who mind their ma and a Winchester they mind more. There's Nate Gallo with a mule string. Owes me 2 favors and pays his debts. There's the preacher who don't like me, but likes scripture. He'll stand on words if he can't stand with me. He tugged his hat brim. We spread sense where we can sow. When nonsense arrives, it feels the minority. Men was already thinking in dimensions Silas hadn't remembered a life could have. Kitchen, she said, turning toward the door. I make food for Elise. It was not a question. It was a treaty. Tucker gave her a small bow, as if the territory itself had just agreed to a parley. Much obliged, miss. They spent that day laying lines exactly the way men had drawn invisible. Silas stretched wire-tight, where the wash cut sneaky behind the barn. He set a bell on the far gate and rigged a string to his headboard that would tug his sleep if the hinge sighed. He cut firing lanes into the mesquite the way a surgeon would, apologizing to the birds and then to the bullets. Tucker rode and knocked, and spoke his sermon of sense and law in porches that smelled of lie and babies. Men filled the table with the kind of food that keeps men from believing cruelty proves something. Cornbread, stew so thick the spoon stood, coffee that could have thawed a grudge. She learned where Silas kept the matches and where he kept the shotgun shells, and afterward she set both where they made better sense. At dusk, because dusk brings counting, they sat again on the porch with their work coiled inside them. Far off, the sound of hooves braided with voices. Not many. Not yet. Silas's jaw clicked in that way men's jaws do when they're measuring distances between skin and bone. They're early, Tucker said, stepping from shadow with a toothpick like a white flag. Jennings couldn't keep himself. He's got 5, 6, a sheet of paper, and a boy who looks like he eats grudges for breakfast. Blake. Silas stood. Men stood. Tucker did not tell either of them to sit. He knew better than to interrupt the dignity of chosen spine. Hooves slowed at the gate. The men formed themselves into the shape men take when they think numbers are morals. Jennings held up the paper like Moses turning bureaucrat. Ward, he shouted, by order of the Copper Falls Business League, you're to produce the Oriental girl for inspection and removal. Business League ain't law, Tucker said mildly from the fence line. Don't need to be, Jennings said. We are the town. You are a noise the town makes, Tucker corrected. Law's the bones. Blake nudged his horse forward, face sharp with something that would scar wrong. Give her up, old man, he called to Silas. Folks'll forgive if you make it easy. Silas stepped to the top stair and let the sunset lay brass on his shoulders. He kept the rifle down by his thigh, where it spoke softly. Boy, he said, not unkindly, I've been forgiven for things I didn't do and damned for the things I did. Neither changed the son's mind. She stays. Jennings crumpled the paper carefully, as if cruelty deserved tidy corners, and tucked it away. Then we'll come back bigger, he promised. Tomorrow, next day, we'll come back until you're tired or we're satisfied. Tucker leaned on the post like patience had hired him. You'll come back to a judge if you come back at all. I wired him your names. He knows the choir list. He tapped the post. You don't want to sing where he's pointing. Morrison, pale with a more intelligent fear, tugged at Jennings's sleeve. Cord, he murmured. Federal. Jennings ignored him because men like him keep their hearing where flattery speaks. You'll lose your place, Ward, he said, as if place were a thing the likes of him could gift or snatch. You'll lose your neighbors. Silas looked past them to the road, where already two figures stood in quiet. Mrs. Bell's eldest with a rifle across his chest, and Nate Gallo with his mule, ears like question marks. On the far fence, the preacher leaned both forearms on a post and set his Bible down without opening it, as if tonight's scripture's job was just to be present. Neighbors choose themselves, Silas said. Same as family. Same as freedom. Blake spat into dust that would forget him. We ain't done, he hissed. Boys that say that rarely are, Tucker replied. Problems they ain't started either. He flicked the toothpick into the yard. Go on home. Tell your pa's mirror he looks like a man. Let him lie back to you. They went. Not far. Not for long. But the road did a small mercy and took them out of sight. Night dropped with a thud. Coyotes signed the peace agreement again. Men sagged against the post. All the upright lines were going soft in an instant. Silas reached out without thinking and steadied her elbow. She let him. You can sleep on the porch if it feels better, he said. Some souls don't trust roofs all at once. She looked up at the stars that had come big, democratic, and near. Roof can be, friend again, she said, an experiment. I will teach it. He nodded. It'll learn. They were halfway to their rooms when she stopped where the wooden horse stood on the shelf. One will tie to its purpose by string. You fix tomorrow? She asked. Silas swallowed. Yes, ma'am. She touched the horse's ear, the tenderest pat. Then I will sleep. A distant owl broke the dark into syllables that meant both warning and blessing. Somewhere in town, a man like Jennings practiced a speech in a mirror. Somewhere along the wash, the judge's telegram clacked its way closer across a country that always wanted to be decent and forgot. On the porch, the wind set the bell on the far gate to a restive breathing. Tucker took the first watch and hummed a hymn without words. Silas laid down with the string tied to his wrist and the rifle across two nails. Men slid under the patch quilt and did not sleep right away, but when sleep came, it came like a thing that had finally found the house with quiet in it. Dawn came up like a slow apology, pink rubbed thin across the farm mesas, and the bell on the far gate dozed from its night of breathing. Tucker's hat brim was white with dew. He rose from the porch rail as a man does whose bones still remember cavalry, quiet, efficient, irritated at sunrise for arriving as scheduled. Judge wired back, he said, passing Silas a folded slip that smelled of iron filings and dusted hope. Riding circuit hard. 3 days if his horse don't take offense. He'll hear petition. Put this auction rot in the ground with both boots. 3 days is a long time in a short temper, Silas answered. Then we hold the temper, Tucker said. Long as we can without breaking our own. Men came out with coffee and cornbread slick with a smear of bacon grease and honey as thin as you might spare to a friend in winter. The steam curled like cursive in the chill air. She set 3 cups down as if rituals were fences, too. You eat, she told them softly. Work after. They did, and the day climbed its ladder. Work came honest and quick. Tucker set pickets. Neighbors who'd said they weren't built for fighting until the Lord handed them a reason. Mrs. Bell sent both her boys and a jar of peaches she insisted was ammunition. Nate Gallo brought 2 spare mules and a coil of rope. The preacher arrived with his Bible and a revolver he swore he would not use unless Scripture ran out of herbs. Men spread burlap on the kitchen table and mapped the place with a fingertip dipped in coffee. Hear the wash, hear the windmill, hear the blind corner men always trust. We put barrels here, she said, tapping the angle where the corral fence kissed the barn. Water. Fire comes. Tucker nodded. She thinks like an old scout. I think like woman, men replied, unblinking. We look where danger hides and where food spoils. By noon, they had turned the ranch into something every good place becomes under threat. A small nation with laws written in kindness and wire. Clouds crawled up from the south with the look of men who owed money. Heat bent the air above the ground into wavy script. Buzzards made lazy circles as if to remind the land it was mortal. Around mid-afternoon, A rider broke from the south road with the haste of a message that had not volunteered. He hauled his roan to a walk at the fence and lifted an empty hand as if it weighed more than a pistol. "Name's Harlan Pike," he called, voice carrying a guilt that had already introduced itself. He wore a deputy's tin star that looked borrowed. "Jennings sent me ahead. Says he's bringing the business league back with actual business, papers, signatures, a whole ladder of lies. There'll be 10, maybe a dozen. A wagon with kerosene. They aim to smoke you out. Figured you should know." Tucker's gaze flicked to the badge. "You wear that by habit or by dare, Mr. Pike?" "Neither," Pike said. "By sorrow." He took off the star and pinned it to the fence post where it would shine for whoever needed reminding. "I'll let him talk me into it when they thought ink could do a gun's work. Watched that auction with my mouth shut and my hands in my pockets like a man who'd lost count of his knuckles. That girl," his throat tightened on the word without shaking it. "I ain't proud. Thought you should hear from a coward before the brave arrive." Tucker's jaw went thoughtful. "You willing to testify when the robe comes?" Pike nodded once, the short kind that hurts. "I'll stand where you put me. Stand with Mrs. Bell's boys by the wash," Tucker told him. "If you run, run toward us." Pike swallowed and rode where he was sent. The first rumble of thunder started low, like men talking in another room about you, and rolled over the flats. The light went pewter. The wind got mischief in it and shifted twice, unsure which flank to bite. Silas set barrels under the eaves and filled them until their reflections shook. Men wound wet burlap around the porch posts. "Fire eats houses by corners," she murmured, as if instructing a foolish child. "We feed corners water." She had a little packet she carried like a talisman, needles, thread, a thimble scarred by past negotiations. She used it now to stitch 2 sacks into a curtain for the kitchen door to keep sparks from walking in. "Men," Silas said, as the sky took its second breath. "There's a cellar under the pantry'll mind you if things turn quick." She looked up without ducking. "I am done living in ground," she said. "I stand." He answered the only way a man can when he's been out-argued by someone who has survived more. "All right." By the time the sun stumbled toward the rim, they heard the main party come. Hoofs a dozen, wheels 2, voices a single ugly word said a dozen ways. The kerosene wagon creaked like it was embarrassed to have been invited. They formed at the fence line, and a wind tore through their hats and tossed dust at their pronouncements like punctuation the Lord himself provided. Jennings raised both hands to shoulder height, palms out, a politician asking the thunder to co-sign his contract. "Ward," he called, "we aim a peaceful solution. Turn over the girl, and this goes quiet as a churchyard." From the porch, Silas could feel the porches of other houses and other years under his boots, his wife's breath at his shoulder, his daughter's laugh on the stair. He set those ghosts beside him like witnesses. "No," he said, "a simple word, a strong fence." Blake pushed forward, slick hair damp with storm and malice. He held a paper like a snake by the tail. "Petition signed by 25 respectable men," he announced, declaring the Chinese an unfit element in Copper Falls and subject to removal. Tucker, at the yard's edge, didn't look up from the toothpick he had not yet chewed. "Respectable ain't a signature I recognize," he said, "and a petition has about as much standing as a bar stool after midnight." He lifted the real telegram. "Judge'll be here in 2 sunrises. Your paper ain't going to like the way his gavel spells." Jennings smiled the way men smile when they've decided law is furniture. He gave a small nod. The wagon's driver reached for the kerosene tap, and thunder lifted its head. "Wind's wrong for fire," men said from the porch rail, eyes half closed as if listening to a stove. "You burn yourself first." Jennings's eyes slid over her like she was an object that had learned to talk out of turn. "She's got a mouth on her," he said, as if to himself, as if the fact of her voice were an offense to the air. "Her mouth stays," Silas replied, "and so does the rest." The first 3 men dismounted and took axes to the outer fence, striking where wire met post, where the wood had been worried by weather into a grain that invited blade. Every chop landed with a sound like a small yes to a large wrong. "Don't," Tucker said, conversational as coffee. Vandalism's a cheap sin, boys. It stains worse than arson because you can't brag about it later. They chopped anyway. Mrs. Bell's eldest, Sam by courtesy and Samuel by the full weight of his mother's rage when needed, rose from the wash with his Winchester shouldered and a calm that had borrowed itself from the book of Ecclesiastes. "That'll do," he called. Blake wheeled. "You got no part in this, farm boy." Sam's cheek rested easy to the stock. Every man's got a part where decency's being rustled. The storm finally remembered its job and spat a drop the size of a thimble onto the dust. It burst like a promise coming due. Then another. Then a sheet, quick as a drawn curtain. The kerosene men swore as the tarp slipped and oil sloshed useless as a sermon shouted into a well. Seems Providence voted. The preacher observed, not opening his Bible because at times the sky is scripture enough. Jennings changed tactics like a man who owns a second lie for every first one that fails. He lifted his hands again. "We won't burn," he said. "We'll wait. Copper Falls won't trade its peace for one little heathen. Ward, you brought this on your own head. On hers." He turned his horse, sure of the effect of a threat deferred. How it eats a stomach from the inside. Blake lingered, though, the way a snake's tail has a last say. He pointed straight at Min with a boy's audacity, wearing a man's cruelty for a suit. "You ain't safe anywhere," he told her. "All we need is for the law to look the other way 1 hour." Min narrowed her eyes against rain. "You need law to look away," she said in a voice soft as the inside of bread. "I need a law to look and did not find it. I learned to stand alone. You do not know how." He flinched as if she'd slapped him with a thought he couldn't parry, then dragged his horse around and followed the retreat. The storm emptied itself quick and clean, as western storms do, blessing and threat in the same bucket. Water ran brief rivers down the ruts and vanished into a land built to drink without thanks. The world smelled like iron and a first chance. They mended what the axes had started and set a second bell. And as they worked, Pike came up sodden and contrite and useful. "Jennings will be back," he said. "Night is soft ground for hard men. He'll come then, with faces he can disown in daylight. Then we watch in layers," Tucker said. "We let the fools wake the bells, and we hold the bullets like tithes." Men moved through twilight, as if the dim were a language she spoke. She set lanterns low and back from windows, so they threw light without offering target. She put wet sacks where sparks might fancy dancing. She stitched a little cross of red thread on the edge of the towel hanging by the pump. One small clause of luck or memory or both. Silas took the east side with Sam Bell. Tucker had the gate with Nate and the preacher. Pike lay in the mesquite like a man who had once been a boy who loved pretend and had grown up in unnecessary games. Near midnight, when even the coyotes get to second thoughts, the far bell breathed once, twice, then found its throat. Men came low and mean between the junipers. Faces dark with chimney, soot-like boys playing Comanche, but quieter and with worse intention. They carried clubs wrapped with rawhide, the kind that leaves memory without bruise a judge will respect. One had a chain, one had a sack. Their boots slid like snakes. The moon, fresh washed by rain, watched everything and took notes. "Hold," Tucker breathed, and the word moved along the fence like electricity's sober cousin. They came to the cut fence, already mended, found their wire mystery and their feet ignorant. One muttered, one laughed too high, one bent to test the strand and yelped when barbs remembered their job. The sack man lifted his bag and whispered something about shut her up, then drag. The chain man wrapped the links around his fist like rosary-gone atheist. "Now," Tucker said. Lanterns flared behind them. The preacher's voice, when it came, was the kind that fixes a spine by accident. "Sirs, you trespass in darkness because your cause fears daylight. Turn back and keep what's left of your names." A shot cracked, not from the house, but from the wash, where Sam put a hole clean through the hat of the chain man and left his hair parted by Providence. Pike rose and cocked his pistol once, as if to remind his hands they belonged to him now. Nate stepped the mule forward, and the animal pinned his ears and showed the blessed white of his heels. Even beasts know mobs. The chain man fled, leaving his links like shed pride. The sack man tripped over the mended wire and left his bag to the mesquite. Two others fired wild and were answered by the sharp, tidy punctuation of Tucker's deputies, sending a message that even night can read. A bullet took a splinter from Silas's porch post, as if carving a notch in a day that wouldn't forget anyway. Min did not duck. She lowered the lantern so its light wouldn't show the shooter what to love. Then Blake came out of the shadow like a bad thought realized, face streaked, eyes bright, not the brightness of bravery, the glint of a boy who has finally found a stage. He had a shotgun cut short, unlawful as a sin committed in church. He leveled it at the porch where Min's silhouette stood against the kitchen's warmer dark. "Move, and she's dust," he hissed. Everything paused. The wind, the storm's last drip from the eaves, even the cricket that had been singing compromise. Tucker's hand froze halfway to his holster because men who've lived long like him measure the gaps they leave for grace. Silas stepped down one stair, boots loud on purpose. "Son," he said, voice level as a plumb bob, "that iron makes cowards brave and brave men foolish. You ain't either yet. Put it down." Blake's mouth worked around a sneer he hadn't earned. "You gonna teach me, old man?" "Already are," Silas replied. "You just ain't learned." Min's voice slid in under both their tones, soft and close as a quilt. "Blake," she said, and he startled at the intimacy of his name in her mouth. "You bring chain, sack, gun, many heavy things. You carry all because your heart is empty. Put one thing down. Make room." The words landed where his mother's hand should have been when he was 12. For an instant, a breath wide and tender, his wrist softened. The barrel dipped an inch. Tucker's eyes narrowed. The law-watching conscience tried to be born. Then Jennings's shout tore across the yard from the dark. "Boy, do it!" It snapped like a whip. Blake's arms hardened. He swung the muzzle up. Too high, too eager, fired. The blast tore the porch eave, burst the wet burlap into a cough of steam and char, threw splinters into the night like broken words. Silas moved, not fast for a younger man, but with the economy of someone who'd done the geometry when the day was quiet. His rifle came up and spoke once. The short gun clattered from Blake's hand. The boy howled, clutching a wrist that would never forget mathematics. Tucker's men stepped from the wash and the gate at once, light and iron converging, and the rest of the night visitors found themselves under a sky that had run out of cover. "Drop," Tucker ordered, and men who had thought themselves stories obeyed. Jennings stood beyond the fence, just at the line where a man can claim he wasn't there, face sick with the look of someone whose plan has become expensive. "This is assault," he cried, ridiculous as rain suing the ground. This is the part where you hush, Cord," Tucker said, finally taking the toothpick out of his mouth. "Hand where I can see you. All of them. Even the ones you talk out of." They took names under lantern light. They wrapped Blake's wrist, men cutting a strip from flour sack and binding him tighter than his pride allowed. He refused to meet her eyes, but he couldn't pull away, not when pain had humbled him into honesty. "You ain't afraid of dying?" he muttered at Silas, ragged around the bravado. "No, son," Silas said, reloading by feel. "Just of dying forgotten." Rain ticked the barrels like a clock deciding to be generous. The sack lay in the mud, limp and obscene. Pike stood beside it, jaw tight, as if taking notes for a confession he meant to make whole. When it was done, when wrists were tied with rope that, for once, meant safety, when pistols were stacked like bad ideas finally gathered, when the preacher's Bible lay open by accident to Micah, and the verse about doing justly had walked out into the yard and introduced itself, the night let go. Tucker looked to the east, where dawn would argue its case in a few hours. "One more long day," he said. Then a judge. "Men like Jennings don't respect robes," Nate observed, scratching the mule between the ears until the animal leaned like a drunk against him. "Maybe not," Tucker said, "but they respect jails built of stone and memory. And he'll find both if I have to haul him here on a travois." Men clean blood from the porch post with a rag and water, and the kind of attention women give to stains the world says will never come out. She wrung the cloth and watched the red water thin at the pump's mouth until it ran honest. Silas picked up the wooden horse from the shelf, as if it had weight again. He set it on his knee, cut the string gentle, and set a real peg through the wheel, shaving it clean with a knife that knew many uses. He spun the wheel with a thumb. It turned, true as a thought finally said aloud. Min watched him, and this time her smile wasn't a lantern. It was morning. "Tomorrow," she said, "we fix fence, cook for judge, teach roof to be friend, and bury this night proper," Tucker added, coiling rope with a neatness that would have done for a sermon's final point. Over the flats, the last tatter of cloud went silver, then ash. Coyotes gave one drowsy yip, like a benediction they didn't mean, but couldn't help. In town, a telegraph key dared another message. In a cell that didn't yet exist, a space measured itself for men who had mistaken numbers for right. On the porch, a horse with a mended wheel rolled a straight line across a plank scarred by splinters and rain, and an old rancher felt something unknit in his chest and reknit stronger. When the judge finally rode into Copper Falls, the dust of violence had already settled and the sky looked cleaner for it. Silas Ward stood on his porch beside Min, the mended fence humming in the wind, the wooden toy horse spinning its wheel true at their feet. What began as $3 and a mistake had become a reckoning that stripped the town of its cruelty and gave a man back his purpose. Jennings and his son would face the law, but that wasn't the real victory. The real one was quieter, a girl who could stand in her own name, and a rancher who'd learned that redemption isn't found in prayer or punishment, but in the simple act of standing beside what's right. As the sun fell over the New Mexico hills, Silas whispered the words he'd earned the hard way. Freedom's bought with courage, not coin.